the sports shows. The big think tanks, and we've had think tanks to do with always planning the future and how they would create societies and even different cultures within 100 years, say, from this type of society to that society to the next society, how they'd implement it, again always through the youth culture, which is easy to do if you have universal education. You can always mandate the same system, same culture to be taught to the youth. However, as I say, since the 1960s, once television really took off, sports used to only come out on Saturdays, and over a 10-year period, it gradually came on every night of the week. Until today, we have even sports channels, sports. So now you see guys who are sitting home, who are basically powerless at work. They have bosses. They're powerless on the roads. There's police and traffic wardens and cops watching them. They have no means to feel strong, and so they tend to watch sports as a substitute. They project themselves into a game which they never participate in, but as long as their team wins, they feel something's happening in their life that's positive and it's successful. It's a very good substitute for many things as far as the elite are concerned. Now, the big think tanks that involved many professional people knew that they'd have to give something this for the males, and for the women they'd also give a substitute too. The intention being ultimately to alter society, drastically alter it so much that even the purpose, for instance, of marriage would lose any appeal. For the females, they gave them high fashion, accessible prices for high fashion clothes. They brought in, people don't realize, they brought in the miniskirt back in the 1920s during Prohibition. They brought in cocaine at the same time as along with the booze to get young people in. The idea being that if you're doing something illegal, it's very naughty. Youngsters love to break the rules, get together, we're all being naughty together, and sex and booze, coupled with coke being smuggled in at that time, had its desired effects, but not quite the way it was designed to have by those that planned that culture, the Bernays types. And Bernays was heavily involved in this. So they came out, as I say, with not sex and rock and roll, but sex in a form of jazz. The Charlton dance came in, the miniskirt came in, sex became rather rampant for the first time. All the old traditional taboos were broken with one generation, but there was fallout to this change, this massive change in culture. The fallout being that they did not have the antibiotics to treat all the sexually transmitted disease that came along. Secondly, they didn't have the legal abortion clinics to take care of the unwanted children that also were produced by hyper-promiscuity. They opened up big orphanages to try and take care of this, the boys' towns. They had ones for girls too. But there was so much backlash, especially in the United States, from the old Christian communities, that they had to tone it all down. It kind of flopped, as I say. Sexually transmitted disease became rampant, so did unwanted pregnancies and abortions. And so they went back to the drawing board, because remember, before this all happened, the big players, the new high priesthood, we'll call them, of the Time Lords, those who create the future, work in think tanks for the big establishment, had a definite mandate. The only problem was how do you achieve that mandate over a time period. So they went back to the drawing board, and they've always known, for instance, that in wartime, more children are produced because young people who might go off to die tomorrow tend to be far more promiscuous. They brought this back after World War II big time and worked on it steadily. All their tax money went into one particular area of research, not just for the atomic weaponry and so on. It went into finding ways of finding a contraceptive that was effective. When they found it and launched it on the scene, at the same time as they launched what they called pop music, along with drugs, LSD and so on, they brought out the contraceptive. So then permission was given, in a sense, and promoted from the top down, even from the BBC, which is, remember, the BBC is owned by the British government. It's an arm of the British government. It talks on behalf of the dominant minority who rule Britain. So they began to promote all this stuff. All the DJs they'd bring on television would interview the top pop stars of the day. They were all stoned out their minds. Some of them were falling out of chairs. And the interviewers would say, "Tee-hee, aren't we naughty children?" All aimed at a young generation to emulate. This is what we do. Monkey see, monkey do. Once again, remember, the prime intent was to break the old culture of boy meets girl, going together for a while, getting engaged, getting married, having children. The family unit, they'd said, when they had the League of Nations, which was the precursor of the United Nations, said they'd have to destroy the family unit. Pretty well all of H.G. Wells's non-fiction books promotes all of this agenda. And in fact, he coined the term in the late 1800s. This is how far back this agenda of promiscuity had to go. He coined the term free love. And in one of his books written before 1890, he says, we must promote free love in order to destroy and end the obsolete family unit. Once that's done, he said, the family is no longer in the way when government comes for an individual. Each individual will be solely responsible to the government itself, and no family will stand up around them like a primitive tribe and defend them. At the same time, the foundations within the United States and Britain and elsewhere were funding what appeared to be far-left groups, communist groups. So much so, as I say, the Rees Commission went in to look into this from the 50s to find out why top capitalists who owned international corporations and banks, international banks, were putting up foundations to fund far-left groups. Well, we know now it was to literally destroy the old culture in order to bring in the new culture, the new society. So therefore you have the proliferation of sexual activity. The fallout still came from unwanted pregnancies, far reduced than it had before because of contraception. But then came the lead of the feminist charge, again funded by the Rockefeller Foundation in the States, to spearhead and demonstrate and demand the rights for abortion. If they could get the public to devalue human life, and that's in the writings of Julian Huxley. He says if we can get society to devalue human life, he says, and take humanity off its pedestal as a supreme being on the planet, then, he said, we can bring in our controlled society with a workable population. Everything works within culture towards an agenda. And as Plato said so long ago, over 2,300 years ago, he said, culture and cultural changes must be authorized from the top. If it's grassroots, truly grassroots, then it's outside of the elite's control, and ripple effects could occur, and it could spread anywhere. They couldn't control it, contain it anymore. Therefore, the major changes in culture, which Plato said came through drama and the emulation of actors, actresses, including fashions that they wore, and the music they heard, had to be strictly regulated and authorized from the top. The whole science of this, which was always a science, and understood by those in those businesses, was used to the maximum to literally drastically alter culture so radically in the 60s and 70s that they could never return to a past way of living. We tie that in with another big player, Lord Bertrand Russell, who had experimental schools under royal charter, where he could do things that anyone else would be locked up for doing. He said in his own schools, and there were mixed schools, he said that if he could encourage pre-pubertal sexuality amongst the children, encourage multiple partners from before puberty, he says the chances, because of study and observation, the chances of them ever bonding with one person for the rest of their life was pretty well obsolete, null and void, wouldn't happen. Therefore, that technique all came into play during the 60s. It was called free love. Drugs helped it along the way. And that was the beginning of what we saw as short-term relationships. Divorces became more and more common. Interestingly enough, divorces really took off not because society demanded it or it came from a need or demand from the people. Divorces took off because the Hollywood stars, and remember too, the drama industry, the entertainment industry have always said this: the people follow the stars. And they're the guiding stars in the so-called occult, you see. We tend to worship wealth and people and famous people. We want to be like them. We want to identify with them. The whole idea of divorces came out from Hollywood, the top stars leading the charge for this. Women started to talk about it, who was getting divorced, what actress from what guy, and so on. And gradually it put the idea across to them that, well, if they're getting divorced, then maybe so should I. At the same time, the Bourdaise techniques were used through all kinds of magazines. At that time, 97% of all magazine publications were aimed at women. Because advertisers have said, and it's still taught in marketing schools today, women are far more easy to get to go along with something new than males are. So within all these magazines and write-ups about their famous actresses, their heroines and so on, the rich ones, the average women were reading these stories and identifying with them. They were being told that you can do anything, you can have it all. You can have a career, you can have a family, you had a home. They gave them utter lies, and they coined the term superwoman. So across the whole of Europe and the States and Canada, at the same time, always coordinated at the same time, the media entertainment industry were promoting stories of superwomen. And they'd find someone, real or imaginary, we'll never know, who supposedly was a CEO of a company, who had all these children at home, had a great husband, could manage everything and could cook great cuisine, blah, blah. And that, of course, is a fantasy. This put pressure again on most women to try and live up to the fantasy, as all advertising does. And most of the stuff we're getting is advertising, or at the very least is basic psychological manipulation. Bernays' techniques, again, remembering too that he called it the creation of a consumerist society. Well-behaved people, as long as there's money going around, they would go into the material world and they would forgo having children. That's the same thing as Charles Galton Darwin talks about. If we can encourage the woman and the male to go after the material benefits of the world, there's a slimmer chance they'll actually have children who tend to be economically burdensome. People were addicted to television in a very short space of time. Most people still today think that all entertainment to do with movies, drama, is therefore nothing more than their entertainment. It never ever was that case. The greatest social messages are promoted through movies and drama, high drama, through the fixation of emotive sequences, emotional sequences, not logical, factual sequences, but pushing points across in an emotional way which register and fix in the mind. So emotional content is very, very important, rather than going through an actual discussion or an argument using logic and facts. There's no debate, and when you're being downloaded through fiction, your guard is down, the censor part of your brain is not in action as you would in a debate or a lecture. You're actually in an alpha state, being completely downloaded with new ideas. Very similar to a computer. And so therefore, a culture industry, which is called by its own the culture industry,